Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari Chan, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with another reading of Ballad of Sword and Wine, Volume 4, also known as Tang Jiu by Tang Jiu Qing. And the last place we left off is that the one who's about to be an emperor is a woman, which begs the question, who is this woman? Because if it was just Empress Dowager, he would have just said Empress Dowager. If it was Hua Xiangyi, he would have just said Hua Xiangyi. So have we been misled this entire time, thinking that the heir to the throne that was the extra was one of the boys, and it turns out it was actually one of the girls? Let's find out together, starting now. Chapter 120, Capital Affairs. There was no place for women in the imperial court. The rule of heaven drove them into the inner chambers, where they became delicate objects kept within the small courtyard of their living quarters and cared for in every way by their monarch and their servants, their fathers and sons. While they wanted to be married off, these noble daughters were porcelain vases appraised for their value. Vases had no lofty aspirations or opinions on where they might be placed. The Empress Dowager, Hua Hewei, came from illustrious origins. She was a daughter of direct descent born to the principal wife of the Hua clan. As a child, she had seen nothing of the world beyond the walls of her quarters, and even after her coming-of-age ceremony at 15, she was still bound within the confines of her courtyard. As empress, she had wrested away the highest power in the world from her husband's hands, yet still she never stepped beyond that line into the public world of men. Instead, she drew down the beaded curtain that kept women out of sight of the court and ruled cautiously from behind it. Marshal Tang Jiu Qing came from a similarly distinguished line. She was a daughter of direct descent born to the principal wife of the Qi clan, a family of celebrated generals. Before she went to war, she had been betrothed, but after she came back a soldier, no man dared marry her. She had never received the public conferment of rank she deserved, only a concession before the Jade Dragon Terrace. The Ministry of Rights claimed that, as a woman, she was unworthy of enjoying the posthumous privilege of being enshrined and worshipped within the imperial ancestral temple after death, as other such distinguished individuals were. Even today, the great general Tang Jiu Qing was spoken of in Chudu as the little girl from Qidong. If even one of Qi Shiyu's sons had lived up to expectations, the position of commander-in-chief of the Qidong garrisons would never have fallen upon her shoulders. Xue Xiu Zhuo hadn't planned on helping a woman take the throne at the beginning. That acute disappointment of finding out the lost heir was a girl had driven him to immediately change his strategy. But he changed his mind again when he looked at Liangyi. The girl resembled the Guangcheng emperor far too much. Any minister old enough to have known the Guangcheng emperor would be able to guess Liangyi's parentage at a glance. She was an aberration, the result of incest within the Li clan. After the Eastern Palace fell from power during the reign of Yanqing, the Guangcheng emperor only ever left the palace to call upon the consumptive Prince Qin and his beautiful, defenseless wife. The emperor had no favored concubine in the latter years of his reign, and after he fell ill, his wife and empress, Hua Hewei, seized control of the imperial court and harem to prevent him from begetting another heir. Confined within the layers of walls around him, the Guangcheng emperor had set his sights on his daughter-in-law. Ill. It was only a pity Princess Consort Qin gave birth to a girl. Like an old lion who had run himself into the ground, the ailing Guangcheng emperor had hardly cracked open his eyes when he learned the news. After this, he let go of all the lofty aspirations he had harbored for another son. No one knew when Prince Qin caught wind of the affair, but not long after, the prince passed away from his own illness. Before his death, He had cast Liangyi out of Chudu, but, as if guided by the hand of fate, Xiang Yuan had come across her and brought her back. When Xue Xiuzhuo found Liangyi, she was already in her teens and uncouth in her behavior. Preparing her to take up the role of imperial heir would have been an impossible task without the will to transform her from inside out, a process as painful as shaving living bone. At first, it was difficult. She had wasted so much time in Xiangyuan Villa. If the girl lacked the resolve to completely erase all those superfluous traces of her early life, then nothing could be done. Even if Xue Xiuzhuo himself had the superhuman endurance to try. But Liangyi had corrected herself, one step at a time. Little by little, she carved away those vulgar and frivolous traits. When she began, there were many words she could not read, so she studied through the night, practicing the strokes she couldn't write properly all day and well into the darkness. She seemed to possess the last remnants of strength heaven had left for the Li dynasty. Watching her, Xue Xiuzhuo saw a faint glimmer of light in that dark and crumbling empire. A few months ago, when the warm and misty rains of spring had enveloped the silk tree blossoms, when Qi Huilian, held prisoner, had rejected Xue Xiuzhuo, Liangyi had been sitting upright at a table, practicing calligraphy. She put so much strength in her strokes, she almost tore the paper. When she was done, Liangyi turned her head aside to look out at the drizzle. She watched the rain shimmer down for a long time, expressionless. Later, when Xue Xiuzhuo came to have his meal with her, she sat politely at her place at the table and ate with exacting table manners. Xue Xiuzhuo was particular about not speaking while eating, so they never talked during their meals. Afterward, it was his habit to quiz Liangyi on her studies. This was the most important event of the girl's day. Liangyi had to be precise and clear in her answers. Xue Xiuzhuo never scolded or hit her, but he was more stringent with her than anyone had ever been. Xianzang. Liangyi paused with her head lowered. Am I going to have a new teacher? Gathering the books on the table, Xue Xiuzhuo said without inflection, This isn't something you ought to concern yourself with. Liangyi was silent. She sat with her hands on her knees, listening as Xue Xiuzhuo rose and walked toward the door. At last, she turned to look at him. Is it because I'm a woman? Xue Xiuzhuo stopped and turned to look at Liangyi too. The girl never averted her eyes. Her steady composure resembled Xue Xiuzhuo's own. I am a woman, Liangyi repeated. If this is the reason the new teacher isn't willing to teach me, then I'd like to ask to meet him. Xue Xiuzhuo turned away and proceeded to change his shoes. The rain outside grew louder. No, you two are simply not fated to be teacher and pupil. I will continue to teach you. Fate will not give in to compromise. Wise instructors are hard to come by. I don't wish to miss out on such a teacher. Liangyi had already risen to her feet. Xianxiang. But Xue Xiuzhuo did not look back or answer her. He lifted the curtain, and a servant boy waiting outside rushed to hold an umbrella for him. Carrying the books himself, Xue Xiuzhuo descended the steps and left. Liangyi stood where she was and watched through the gap of the curtain as Xue Xiuzhuo disappeared into the downpour within a few strides. She knew this was an unvoiced rejection from Xue Xiuzhuo. Whatever other people thought of Xue Xiuzhuo, in Liangyi's eyes, beneath his pleasant and refined mask was a terrifyingly calm core, as well as a subtle arrogance. He would never let himself be manipulated by others, and could rarely be convinced to change his mind. She had no choice but to let the matter drop. She sat back down, flipped open the essay on contemporary politics Xue Xiuzhuo had left behind, and began to copy Xue Xiuzhuo's handwriting. For all her practice, she could never write like him. She didn't know how to rein herself in or sand down her edges. Her strokes were like steel blades. They could cut, but not bend. Every word she wrote took the most direct path. Several months later, the sun blazed down upon the heads of a dense mass of court officials kneeling on the Jade Dragon Terrace. These were officials from common households led by Liangyi. At the end of the 6th month, Han Cheng had brought back a boy from his own clan, claiming the child was a lost descendant of the Li clan. Under Yao Wenyu's meticulous care, Liangyi's health had improved enough for him to attend court. The first thing he did when he returned was reject Han Cheng's memorial regarding the child in his captivity as Grand Secretary of the Grand Secretariat and demand an official verification of the child's identity. But the emperors of the Li clan were all dead. The Empress Dowager alone couldn't determine if this child was a legitimate descendant either. The two parties sank into a stalemate, neither willing to make any concession. Han Cheng, head swollen with his new power, had dared to publicly refute Liangyi. I was the vice commissioner of the 8 great battalions during the reign of Yanqing, and the top military officer under the Guangcheng Emperor's command. I have in my possession a private letter from the Guangcheng Emperor entrusting me with the care of this child. Grand Secretary, does this not satisfy you? All the vigor Liangyi had possessed before his illness had faded. If he stood a few moments too long, his heart would palpitate and his hands would tremor. He stepped out of the ranks of officials and said, "These are mere words, with no basis in evidence. If the commander is willing to make the private letter public and turn it over to the Grand Secretariat for examination, then you and I will have no further need to wage this war of words in the imperial court." Inwardly, Han Cheng sneered. The vacant throne and lack of an imperial heir should have been Liangyi's greatest sources of anxiety. If he was unwilling to make a concession here, the Secretariat Elder must have already found his own candidate. The throne of the Emperor has sat empty for more than a month. What is Your Excellency waiting for? The Grand Secretariat has deliberated again and again. Have you still not come up with a solution? Sweating profusely and feeling a tightness in his chest, Liangyi took several shallow breaths before replying. We examined the imperial clan register and learned that the second son of the former Prince Yan's common-birth grandson still resides in Huaizhou. He is a descendant of the Li clan with a traceable lineage. According to our laws, no one but him is a fit candidate for the throne. Prince Yan was the Prince of Huaizhou during the reign of Wan Shen. His direct descendants died in battle at Luosha Pass, and those born to concubines are all collateral branches of the clan. How can they be considered to possess the blood of the Li clan? Not to mention, the second son of Prince Yan's common grandson is approaching 70. Do you imagine he can manage state affairs at his age? Han Cheng smiled without humor. It's a long and bumpy journey to Chudu. Can he weather this kind of physical and mental torment? Grand Secretary, the very idea is absurd. Both parties stood their ground. The students from the Imperial College were also kneeling outside. From behind the beaded curtain, the Empress Dowager, who had been listening in silence, spoke up. Although this matter is urgent, we must take time to discuss it fully. Secretariat Elder, I appreciate the Grand Secretariat's assistance in governmental affairs. There has never been a time when I've handled such important matters with anything less than the care they require. If you have objections, come to Mingley Hall to discuss them with me in person. Please ask the students to disperse. She spoke gently, but Liangyi could hear her displeasure. Although Han Cheng was forceful in his advocacy for this child, he had always submitted his memorials in his capacity as the former vice commissioner of the 8 great battalions, without asking other officials from the noble clan to support his proposal. This was deliberate. Firstly, it would allow the Han clan to become the sole support the new emperor relied on, and secondly, it would allow him to distance himself from the other noble clans. This distance was exceptionally important. Both Hua Siqian and Pan Rugui had lost their lives because they failed to put on a proper show of distance. Forming cliques to further one's own ends was a major taboo in the imperial court. The Empress Dowager had been managing state affairs again for 2 months. At present, she was as good as the emperor. And one thing she couldn't abide was her ministers flocking together to coerce her into making policy decisions. She neither promoted officials from common households as a gesture of goodwill, nor promoted officials from the noble clans in order to consolidate her power. She seemed to understand that Great Zhou had reached a tipping point. Instead of pinning her hopes on a puppet emperor, as she had done a few years ago, she might as well count on herself. Liangyi had been sick for weeks, during which time the officials from common households had been constantly on edge. In the absence of an emperor, Kong Qiu and Tang Yu had taken the lead, holding private discussions and repeatedly submitting memorials requesting that the Empress Dowager allow Liangyi to return to the imperial court to administer state affairs. Now even the students from the imperial court had the guts to engage in open discourse regarding state affairs. It was only the 6th month, yet already there were rumors that the Empress Dowager had seized power and planned to establish herself as the ruler of the realm. The Empress Dowager had no overt discussions with Liangyi while he was convalescing, but she sent the court eunuchs to his manor with increasing frequency, which was a kind of subtle pressure in itself. Liangyi thus returned to court partway through the 6th month, just as his illness began to take a turn for the better. Although he had for decades asserted that he was beholden to no faction or clique, he had long become the beacon to which all the scholars of common households in the land looked for guidance. This was a fact he couldn't deny even if he wished to. He had, without meaning to, become a powerful force all his own. When Liangyi had fallen ill, everyone across the land had panicked. When Liangyi rejected Han Cheng's memorial, the officials and students spent a day kneeling before the Empress Dowager even gave her reply. Without realizing it, he had become a thorn in the Empress Dowager's side, one far more dangerous than the pompous and overbearing Han Cheng. Liangyi remained standing with great effort. The students of the imperial court have always had a duty to discuss state affairs. The eyes of the empire are fixed on the imperial court. Only when there is open dialogue can there be good policies. Your Majesty heads the administration and attends to every matter with diligence, but officials are appointed to share the burdens of their superiors above and to oversee the work of their subordinates below. It's Great Zhou's blessing that these students are so concerned over state affairs. Moreover, the matter of the prospective monarch is not a private family affair. It is this subject's opinion that only by allowing them to remain can we have a frank discussion concerning the new emperor. Though it was warm outside, it wasn't stuffy in the hall, and there were bamboo blinds and crushed ice everywhere. To Liangyi, it even felt a little cool. He stood with his head bowed after saying his piece. Behind the beaded curtain, the Empress Dowager was silent for a long time. Just as Liangyi's legs were starting to ache, she finally answered in an unhurried tone. What the Secretariat Elder says makes sense. In that case, I shall listen to you. As for the matter of the second son of Prince Yan's common grandson, I have yet to see the clan registry, so it would be inappropriate for me to come to any conclusion. Regardless, Han Cheng's candidate is already here. Shall we let the Imperial Judicial Review assist in the investigation, or would you prefer the Ministry of Justice do it? I shall do as you say. Chapter 121. Liangyi. When court was dismissed, Liangyi refused the support of anyone as he walked out. Kong Qiu and the rest knew the Secretariat Elder was strong-willed and hated to appear weak. They only dared trail behind him and watch as he hobbled along alone, slowly making his way down the steps. Bathed in the last rays of the setting sun, his official robe was like a thin, dark scar melting into the evening splendor. This time last year, he had led hundreds of officials into court. He had been an imposing, spirited sight. Now, there was no trace of that will and spirit left in him. Liangyi reached the bottom of the steps and stopped. He slowly turned back to look at the officials on the stairs behind him, then at the last remaining glimmer of daylight above the upturned eaves of Mingli Hall. "It's getting dark," Liangyi said gently. "Be careful on your way back." For some reason, Kong Qiu was gripped by a sudden dread. He took a step forward and grasped Liangyi's arm to support him, his voice catching as he called out, "Teacher." Liangyi waved a hand and turned back, walking toward the palace gates. That descendant of Prince Yan's grandson was Liangyi's last line of defense. As he watched the setting sun swallowed up by the shadows of the buildings, a sense of powerlessness washed over him. He knew what it signified for a child of the Han clan to ascend the throne. He had fought this battle for 30 years, yet his slow and steady pursuit of peace had never scored him the victories he sought. What could he do but use himself as tinder, throwing his old bones into the flames to feed the blazing fire, hoping to make enough sparks to ignite the long-dormant night sky? An endless night had descended upon the Zhou Empire, and Liangyi seemed to be the only remaining torch. Yet even now, he couldn't quite bring himself to admit that Qi Huilian and the rest, all those who once shared the same goal as him despite their differing paths, had failed. He had watched those great minds fall like shooting stars, one after another. In the end, he, once so insignificant, was the last man standing. 30 years ago, Liangyi had not been concerned with either success or failure. And now, after 30 years, Liangyi was entirely burned out and spent. Slowly but surely, he had walked his own path. He had attempted to grab hold of the radical Qi Huilian, who had charged recklessly ahead. But he'd failed. No one knew that the night the Eastern Palace had perished was the most devastating in Liangyi's life. By the time Liangyi made his way to the palace gates, it was full dark, and he was out of breath. He lifted his sleeves to wipe sweat from his brow and saw Yao Wenyu waiting for him beside the sedan. Liangyi let Yao Wenyu help him get settled inside. Just as his student was about to lower the curtain, Liangyi spoke. "Yuanzhuo, there is a weight on my mind that has yet to be lifted. Why don't you make a trip to Jincheng tomorrow on my behalf? Pack your bags tonight." During the court session a few days later, the Empress Dowager exempted Liangyi from standing, but the more she treated him with courtesy and respect, the more clearly it signaled her increasing dissatisfaction with him. The Grand Masters of Remonstrance from the Chief Surveillance Bureau had come together over the past few days to launch a series of scathing rebukes of Han Cheng. Demands for official verification of the lineage of the child from the Han clan were at an unprecedented high, and the tidal wave of support surging around Liangyi forced the Empress Dowager to consider a concession. The Empress Dowager had stayed awake all night deliberating, and her hesitation put Han Cheng in a desperate situation. Gradually, it dawned on him that the Empress Dowager was trying to rid herself of him by someone else's hand. As soon as he collapsed under the weight of his gambit and perished beneath the course of castigation, the Empress Dowager could put the Han clan's son on the throne at once without the inconvenient possibility of Han Cheng making his own grab for power. With him out of the way, she could turn her focus to confronting the officials of common backgrounds. Whether she wished to push Liangyi aside indefinitely or replace the Grand Secretary of the Grand Secretariat, she could do it with significantly more ease than she could at present. Han Cheng was unwilling to give up. How could he surrender the power that was at his fingertips? If he had to put up with the censor's abuse, he would endure it until Liangyi was dead. "These are turbulent times," Han Cheng said. "Li Bei in the north is eyeing us like a tiger watches prey, while in the east, Zhongbo is beginning to stir as well. Will the people still follow the lead of the Grand Secretary if the throne sits empty because the Grand Secretariat keeps delaying the question of the imperial heir? His mouth was blistered from the verbal battle that had gone on for days. He flung his sleeves and snapped. "If you ask me, the Grand Secretary is inciting his own clique to obstruct the imperial court from designating a new crown prince. His actions ought to be condemned." "That's a slanderous accusation." Sun Yu had rebuked him in his capacity as the head of the imperial censors. "We've been discussing the appointment of the imperial heir for days on end, yet the commander remains unwilling to verify the identity of the imperial heir. Who is the one trying to obstruct our efforts? The imperial court previously enjoyed the support of the whole realm. If not for the commander's insistence on arresting the Marquis of Dingdu, Xiao Chiye, would Chidu be caught in such a predicament? If we are to hold someone accountable, you'd be the first to bear the blame." "I see how it is." Han Cheng sneered and pointed at Sun Yu. "Xiao Chiye assassinated the late emperor. As chief commander of the Embroidered Uniform Guard and military commissioner of the 8 Great Battalions, it was my duty to apprehend him. If what I did was wrong, perhaps you think he was right to assassinate the late emperor. Everyone knows you're on good terms with Xiao Chiye and Shanzichuan. Yet Sun Xunyi, the Ministry of Justice hasn't implicated you in their investigation, have they? What a good friend you have in Kong Bozhen. I'm truly envious." Fury colored Kong Qiu's face. "What nonsense is this? We're still investigating whether Xiao Chiye was involved in the late emperor's death. If we merely take your word for it without any witnesses, we might as well do away with the Ministry of Justice. Besides, were you not also present during our private feast? You had plenty to drink." "I'm a member of the Embroidered Uniform Guard," Han Cheng said. "It is my duty to keep my ear to the ground at all times, making note of what I see and hear. If I don't show up when you senior officials have your private gatherings, how can I know what has been said? I already had someone transcribe everything that was discussed that night in detail for Her Majesty. I'm innocent. Do you dare say the same?" Having received a helping hand from Xiao Chiye in the past, the Minister of Works, Pan Xiangjie, was also fearful of being implicated and had been keeping a low profile in court. Han Cheng was at the height of his power, and Pan Xiangjie went along with whatever he said. Seeing them argue like this, his lips opened and closed, and he shuffled several steps back like a turtle retreating into his shell, too cowardly to cut in. Gradually, their verbal assaults became more and more outrageous. Sun Yu was the most eloquent of them all, berating Han Cheng with such scathing force that Han Cheng could endure it no longer. He pointed at Sun Yu, his hand trembling with rage that threatened to burst out of him. Still, he kept his wits. Closing his eyes, he slid to his knees and, surrendering his dignity, burst out into wailing. "Oop. Your Majesty." Han Cheng prostrated himself before the Empress Dowager and wept bitterly. "Your Majesty, this subject's heart is no less pure and bright than the moon overhead. It's my fault for trying to arrest Xiao Chiye. It was also my fault that the late emperor was assassinated. And now, somehow, it's my fault that we have no candidate for the throne. As a subject, I'm willing to be punished by my sovereign, and I'm willing to die for my sovereign. If I've erred, let the blame fall upon me. Kill me alone or execute my family along with me. I will accept any sentence my master metes out." Kong Qiu found this man truly shameless. He promptly removed his official's hat. "I am ashamed to stand beside such a vile character as the chief commander. If we cannot verify the legitimacy of the imperial heir, then I, Kong Borjan, may as well forfeit my official post." The Empress Dowager shot to her feet. She lifted the beaded curtain, sweeping a cold glance over each of them in turn before stopping at Han Cheng. "We're discussing matters of state in the imperial court. What are you crying for? Get up." She next turned to Kong Qiu. "You are a member of the Grand Secretariat, effectively second to the Grand Secretary. You preside over affairs of state, yet you constantly use your resignation as a threat. Are you trying to force my hand? Or are you thinking only of your own reputation? Only you would know. Since the first moment I stepped in on behalf of the throne, I have consulted with the Grand Secretariat in all matters great and small. What is there that can't be worked out through civil discourse? Must you push every step of the way?" All the ministers fell to their knees. "Our forefathers laid down the rule that the harem is not to interfere in politics. I have overstepped my station so many times it shames me to face my ancestors. Jianheng passed away so suddenly from illness. Had it not been for your repeated pleas, would I have dared to appear before this court once again to oversee state affairs? We are in need of an emperor, and I'm merely a widow without a child." Hot tears brimmed in her eyes as she spoke. "When did I ever suffer such treatment while the Guangcheng emperor lived?" Han Zheng appeared so moved by the empress's abiding love for her husband that he covered his face and lay face down on the ground, wailing. "This subject never encountered such disrespect when the Guangcheng emperor was around either. I know well that I'm an ignorant and shallow person. I'm merely an oaf. Of course, I'm not so bold as to compare myself to any of the officials from the Grand Secretariat, much less vie with the Grand Secretary himself for prestige. It's only because of my staunch loyalty and love for the Li dynasty that I returned the imperial heir to the court. Grand Secretary, why go so far to defame me?" Han Cheng had been fanning the flames toward Hai Liangyi all this time. Deep down, Kong Qiu was smoldering with anger. "Your Majesty, heaven can attest to the purity of the Grand Secretary's intentions. Designating an heir is no small thing. We are beset with difficulties on all sides. The survival of Great Zhou is at stake. If we do not proceed with prudence and caution now, I fear we will face disaster in the future." "I understand that as well," the Empress Dowager replied. "And that is why I have called everyone here for days on end to discuss it." At last, she seemed to regain a little of her composure. "The imperial heir dwindled after the Guangcheng emperor's time, and now we can't even find ourselves a prospective emperor. The tougher the crisis, the more important it is for us to work together as one. Han Cheng, why not hand over the Guangcheng emperor's private letter so all the officials present can verify its authenticity?" Obviously, Han Cheng had no such letter. He had merely been trying to wait out Hai Liangyi and the Empress Dowager. As soon as Hai Liangyi yielded, the wall of officials from common households would collapse with him. Any further protestations from the Empress Dowager would merely reveal her own ambitions to lead. At that point, she would have no choice but to let the Han clan child ascend the throne, and Han Cheng would truly become the minister guardian of the young emperor. The golden age of the Han clan was right before his eyes. Realizing that the Empress Dowager wanted to take him off the board before that could happen, he beat his chest and wailed louder. "Those of you who doubt my loyalty, you may as well kill me. My younger brother, my dear younger brother. After his hunt for Xiao Zhiye, he remains hostage in Suzhou even now. For the Guangcheng emperor, I took 3 slashes of a blade, and for the late emperor, I suffered injury to one eye. Tell me, am I a shallow, short-sighted person who deceives the world for my own selfish desire?" Selfish desire was all that fueled the passionate discourse at court. Cries and curses flooded the hall, but no one mentioned Prince Yan's descendant again. Kong Qiu remained kneeling, resigned, but his heart had already gone cold. Hai Liangyi, who had not spoken a word that day, suddenly braced himself against the armrests of his chair and stood. Countless eyes converged on him. Officials from common backgrounds looked on expectantly, waiting for the Grand Secretary to turn the tide and regain control of the situation, while officials from the noble clans kept their silence as they watched for their next opportunity. All focused their attention on Hai Liangyi, just as they had in the past. He coughed, his wizened hand trembling as he spat bloody spittle into a handkerchief. He swallowed to moisten his throat before slowly looking around the great hall at all those faces watching, and finally, at the Empress Dowager. "Back when the Li clan were merely feudal lords," he said, "it took years upon years of war before the empire was united. Over the past 100 years, generation upon generation of our great Zhou's officials have, without exception, devoted themselves to the land and spared no effort in performing their duties. During the years of Yongyi, although the city walls of Chudu were old, the empire's integrity remained, and its spirit persevered. At the beginning of the reign of Yongyi, Qi Huilian of Yuzhou came in first in all 3 levels of the imperial examinations. From then on, the imperial college flourished. Although the 3 imperial preceptors of the Yao clan were noble in birth, they had welcomed ideas and opinions from all sides and recruited outstanding men of talent without prejudice. Most of the scholars of humble origin still serving in this imperial court today joined the court during that period. Kong Qiu lowered his head. As he recalled the past, he couldn't help but tremble with quiet sobs. However, this period of brilliance during the reign of Yongyi was but a flash in the pan. The Guangcheng emperor fell ill after a scant 10 years on the throne. The noble clans thrived once again, and class prejudices divided the imperial college. For the remainder of Yongyi and the whole of Xiande, no scholars of common backgrounds entered the imperial court. Today, this is the imperial court of noble clans. Pan Xiangjie looked embarrassed and kept his head low in a kowtow without saying a word. Han Cheng drew breath to speak, but Liangyi raised his voice over him. During the reign of Xiande, when the state treasury was empty, this subject asked Hua Ziqian to hand over the account books. He colluded with others from the noble clans who served in the various ministries to dodge the issue, and dismissed me time and time again. That same year, Jueshi was hit by a plague of locusts that ruined their crops, and the land was gripped by desolation and despair. Once again, this subject demanded that Hua Ziqian hand over the accounts, only to have him brush me off. Not long after, Zhongbo's troops were defeated and its people massacred. Yet following this battle, the granaries of the 6 prefectures were emptied overnight. All the way until his death, Hua Ziqian never gave a clear explanation for this. Was this his fault? Or was it the fault of everyone here for enabling him? Alarmed, Pan Xiangjie rushed to say, about this, the Court of Judicial Review has already, since returning to court, this subject, Hai Ren Shi, has repeatedly remonstrated and requested to officially verify the lineage of the imperial heir from the Han clan. Han Cheng has made excuse after excuse. As of this moment, he is still unwilling to hand over the letter supposedly entrusting the child to him. We have reached a dead end. I therefore took charge and directed the Grand Secretariat to conduct a search through the Imperial Registry before moving forward with a memorial asking Her Majesty to designate the descendant of Prince Yan of Huaizhou as the heir apparent. Here, we have reached another dead end. Stunned by his impassioned tone, the Empress Dowager took half a step back. The beaded curtain clattered behind her as she regarded Liangyi with shock and uncertainty. Liangyi was aflame. The fury in his heart had been suppressed for 30 years, and it burned so intensely his youthful spirit seemed to blaze up once more, leaving the entire hall in shock. As the Grand Secretary, I am to blame for the decline of the state. I have been remonstrating with the ruler all my life. Whether I am successful or not, I have no more to fear. Since my protests are futile while alive, then I shall remonstrate with our great Zhou today with my death. What? A prospective sovereign may be appointed, but it must not be the child from the Han clan. A prospective sovereign may be appointed. Before anyone from the assembly could blink, Liangyi's sleeves rose with the wind, billowing like falling leaves set alight before their eyes. He charged headfirst at one of the great hall's columns, and an earth-shaking thud followed, along with the splatter of blood. A deathly stillness descended over the hall. The Empress Dowager's limbs went cold, and she nearly slid to the ground. She followed the trail of that splattered blood with dread until her eyes landed upon the crumbled form of Liangyi. In a belated moment of realization, The entire court of officials rose to their feet with exclamations of shock. Kongqiu scrambled over his knees and propped Liangyi up. "Renshi," the Empress Dowager's voice trembled. "Why? Why do this?" This one collision permanently severed Han Cheng's route of retreat. With his death, Liangyi would feed the flames of wrath of all the scholars in the land. That child of the Han clan would never become emperor. Whoever dared risk universal condemnation to push him onto the throne would be reviled by every scholar across the empire. Even Han Cheng was stunned. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined Liangyi would go so far. Face awash of blood, Liangyi looked up at the high, unreachable ceiling of the great hall. He had been chasing stability all his life. The first-rank crane of the Mandarin square on his robe was a testament to his cautious, steady leadership. Yet, in his final moments, he, for once, did something extreme. He became the blazing sun that exploded, sending countless rays of light shooting through that pitch-black night of Great Zhou. The crane on his chest, now stained blood-red, rose and fell with his last feeble breaths. "Boran," Liangyi whispered, gripping Kongqiu's hand. "I have done all I can." Chapter 122. The Emperor's Daughter. Yu Xiaozai bent over and sobbed, unable to continue. All the common-born scholars of their generation who went on to take up official posts yearned to be either the patriotic and loyal Qi Huilian, who would lay down his life for his cause, or the wise and dedicated Liangyi, the stabilizing force that could hold the country together in times of crisis. But this empire teetering on a tempest now echoed with the thunderous sound of collapse. In one night, the lofty aspirations of several tens of thousands of people shattered, turning Great Zhou into a shaken nation that echoed with the wails of the desperate. Shen Zichuan turned his head aside in silence and listened to the sound of the night watchman making his rounds beyond the courtyard wall. Yu Xiaozai finally ceased his sobbing and covered his face with a warm handkerchief. When he had composed himself, he continued. The Grand Secretary's final remonstration ended Han Cheng's ambitions, but he refused to concede defeat. The students from the Imperial College were so agitated they blocked Han Cheng's sedan on Shenwu Street as he returned from court and smashed it to pieces. The A-grade battalions locked down the Imperial College, arrested a few of the student agitators, and hauled them to the Imperial prison. They even cut off food supplies to the college, so the students went on a hunger strike. Tears rolled down Yu Xiaozai's face. I thought it would be the end of all the scholars in Chudu, but that night, as I looked at the Imperial College on top of Mount Jingyi, I saw the flickers of revolution and realized the profound foresight of the Grand Secretary, the blaze that would spread across the plains. From the single spark of his death had already become a force to be reckoned with. To quell the fury of the students, the Empress Dowager once again demanded Han Cheng hand over the private letter entrusting the child to his care. In the meantime, she drove that false heir from the Han clan out of the palace. Han Cheng had no choice but to agree. He promised to produce the letter for official verification within 3 days. The letter was forged, of course, and did not bear the Guangcheng Emperor's personal seal. The Grand Secretariat immediately rejected Han Cheng's candidate. After that, the Empress Dowager promised to meet with Prince Yan of Huaizhou's descendant to establish a true candidate for imperial heir. But Huaizhou is far from Chudu. Just as Han Cheng had said, this descendant from Prince Yan's branch was advanced in age. Between the long and tedious journey and the shock of being called to Chudu for such a purpose, he gave up the ghost before even arriving in the capital. The task of designating a prospective sovereign came to a complete impasse. Han Cheng, conniving as he was, leveraged the 8th Grade Battalion's power against the Grand Secretariat. He submitted a memorial requesting the 8 cities step in to assist with governmental affairs. He urged the Empress Dowager to establish a chamber for the deliberation of state affairs, populated entirely by officials from the noble clans. The Empress Dowager shelved the memorial without giving him an answer. Following in the footsteps of the Grand Secretary, Lord Borjan submitted a memorial expressing conditional agreement with this plan, but requested that before Han Cheng could lead such a chamber, his military power must be revoked, as civil officials must not involve themselves with military affairs. Minister Kong hoped to use the opportunity to pry the 8th Grade Battalions out of Han Cheng's hands. Han Cheng flatly refused, and thus the Grand Secretariat didn't give their approval for the chamber. Negotiations fell through once again. The lack of an imperial heir was the crux of this stalemate. With Kong Qiu at the helm, and in the face of the proposal for the 8 cities to take up the reins of government, the officials of the Grand Secretariat had suggested a compromise. This, too, was in line with Liangyi's policy of keeping the peace. After all, the Grand Secretariat had no troops. Qidong was under control of the Empress Dowager, and Li Bei no longer obeyed Chudu's deployment orders after Han Cheng's attempt to arrest Xiao Zhiye. Kong Qiu could only choose the lesser of two evils. Their most pressing goal was stripping Han Cheng of his military power. Whether or not they had control of the military themselves, they could not afford to hand over all the patrols in Chudu to the noble clans as they had before. It was at precisely this moment that Xue Xiuzhuo spoke up. Yu Xiaozai's lips corked in a vague, bitter smile in the dimness. With one stone, he stirred up 1,000 waves. The move he made was ingenious. At the mention of Xue Xiuzhuo's name, Xiao Zhiye looked pointedly at Shen Zichuan. After a moment of silence, Shen Zichuan turned his gaze out the window, his brow tightly furrowed. Yes, you were right. This man is really something else. Rumors of an imperial heir made their way to us too easily, stirring us to action. When we arrived in Zhongbo, I suspected Han Cheng was the one who killed those boys. But it seems that Han Cheng is no different from Xi Hongxuan, another disposable pawn manipulated by Xue Xiuzhuo. It was careless of me to underestimate our enemy. One wrong move, and the whole game is lost. The impasse in the imperial court had gone on less than half a month when the imperial college shifted the target of their verbal attacks from Han Cheng to the prospect of the 8 cities' oversight of governmental affairs. The passionate students grew increasingly dissatisfied with Kong Qiu's moderate strategy. Even as they penned articles in elegies mourning Liangyi, they mourned the more radical Qi Huilian as well. Kong Qiu, at present, was not the Grand Secretary they wished for. The Empress Dowager's concession on verifying the Han clan's candidate had shown these students the power of collective action. They were like water droplets converging from all corners of the realm to form the boundless sea, believing their combined force could crash through the high wall before them. They saw a chance to rid the nation of the malady that was the noble clans right before their eyes. After Kong Qiu conditionally agreed to Han Cheng's proposal for the new governmental chamber, the rhetoric coming out of the Imperial College abruptly changed in focus. First, a strongly worded article was nailed to the door of the Kong residence. Following that, all the criticisms formerly leveled at Han Cheng were redirected toward Kong Qiu. The students became increasingly convinced that the scholar officials of common backgrounds led by Kong Qiu were too weak. This, they thought, was why Liangyi had been left high and dry in the Grand Secretariat, leading to his desperate action and his final remonstration. They made a list of all the court officials from the reign of Yongyi and checked, one by one, any connections those officials might have with officials from the noble clans. News that Sun Yu had invited Han Cheng to a private feast earlier in the year spread like wildfire, sending the students into a frenzy. They labeled Sun Yu, Kong Qiu, and even the Minister of War, Chen Zhan, as rank hypocrites. A short time later, A group smashed Sun Yu's sedan on his way to morning court. He stood before the palace gates with his face covered in blood and raised a hand to heaven, swearing he had never had any inappropriate friendships with the noble clans. A bucket of shit was poured on him for his trouble. Sun Yu couldn't believe these were the same students as before. He had served in the Chief Surveillance Bureau for 20 years and indicted countless major and minor officials of the court. He hadn't shied away from challenging even the Guangcheng Emperor. He never expected his name would one day be dragged through the mud as a villain who shamelessly sought personal gain at the expense of the nation. Even the Yao clan, held up as the exemplar of scholars who were concerned with politics yet kept their distance from power, was not spared. This clan that produced 3 imperial preceptors had enjoyed exceptional honor over the years. Though they had no representative in the imperial court after the reign of Xiande, their influence far surpassed that of the noble clans. They were widely respected among both the noble clans and those of common backgrounds. Liangyi, Qi Huilian, Kong Qiu, and many other old and new officials of the imperial court had all received the Yao clan's advice and guidance at one time or another. The thriving heyday the imperial college had enjoyed during the reign of Yanqing had been owed entirely to old Master Yao's extensive recruitment of talented men. Yet now, the doors and windows of the clan's ancestral hall on the east side of the capital had been smashed. Had Kong Qiu not sent guards as soon as he heard, the hall would have burned down that night. Yao Wenyu himself did not escape the fury. He was Liangyi's only student, yet he refused to take up an official position in the imperial court. His absence last time the imperial court knelt in protest and clashed with Pandru Gui had not been forgotten. Now, with new grievances piling up on top of old scores, they tore up the essays they had once praised and likened Yao Wenyu to a thief, a swindler from the noble clans who had stolen Liangyi's rare wealth of knowledge on the administration of the nation, yet refused to put it to use. Chudu was plunged into chaos. The moment the 8th Great Battalions tried to suppress the students with force, the students would go on a hunger strike in protest. After a handful of students starved themselves to death, Han Cheng no longer dared act rashly. Not even Qi Juyin, all the way in the Bianjuan commandery, managed to make it out unscathed. The marriage between Hua and Qi was due to take place the next month, and those impassioned student diatribes spread like a brush fire all the way to Qidong. The Grand Marshal had always been plagued by insomnia. Now, whenever she wished to rest her eyes at her desk, she asked Qi Wei to read those essays aloud to her. The harsher the scoldings, the more soundly she slept. A fire had indeed begun to rage across the Zhou Empire, but not in the way Liangyi had anticipated. Words like flaming arrows whizzed through the night, drawing a clear boundary between opposing sides. The student protesters demanded strict allegiance and a clear differentiation of black from white. There was no middle ground, only a bitter fight to the death. Kong Qiu insisted he would take no sick leave, but attending court gradually became a dangerous affair. One day, just as he was preparing to head out despite his exhaustion, he encountered a stranger in the innermost courtyard of his estate. The man brandished a sword and berated him, demanding Kong Qiu atone for his crimes with his life. In his capacity as an esteemed official of the Grand Secretariat, Kong Qiu even received students from out of the city and had never bothered to set up any true defenses around his residence. To think a day would come when a stranger would hold a sword to his throat in his own home, it was simply the greatest and most ludicrous joke in the world. It was around this time that Xuexiu Zhuo presented 3 memorials. Their contents were like a towering wave that crashed down and extinguished the crackling fire, its rolling billows winning the scholars over in one great sweep. In his first memorial, he spoke of the innumerable hardships he underwent before finally finding the Guangcheng Emperor's long-lost daughter. He not only presented Prince Qin's personal seal as evidence, but also relevant witness testimonies proving the parentage of the girl beyond doubt. He requested an official verification of this evidence right there on the spot. However, having a woman as emperor was a disruption of the balance of yin and yang, a reversal of the sun and the moon. Such a violation of the natural order had no precedent in hundreds of years. Xuexiujuo's memorial sent the entire imperial court into an uproar. Even Kong Qiu vehemently refuted the notion and refused to consider it. Thereupon, Xuexiujuo presented his second memorial. He revealed that this girl had been raised in a farming household in Chudu, an exceptionally bright child. She was well loved by the family. Although they were a poor household, they had been willing to let her older brother teach her to read and write. As a true-born descendant of the Guangcheng emperor, she naturally differed from the common person. Her family often saw auspicious signs such as rainbows and purple clouds over the house, and thus dared not slight or neglect her, but treated her with utmost attentiveness. The girl was not only intelligent, but also kind. When her neighbors were in distress or elderly villagers were starving, she gave away her own food and personally attended to them. The voices from near and far were unanimous in their praise of her. This, too, could be corroborated with witness testimony. As for her demeanor and bearing, Xuexiujuo would let the various gentlemen see for themselves when he brought the girl to court. The contents of this memorial quickly spread beyond the palace walls. Someone posted a copy in the Imperial College, and from there the news made its way to the streets of Chudu. There were fewer things in the world more precious than an emperor's daughter. The only other young lady who could presently claim such a status in Great Zhou was Third Lady Hua, who had grown up at the Empress Dowager's side. The contrast between the upbringing of the two, one raised in humble poverty, the other raised in luxurious walls of the palace, made the hearts of the common folks ache with sympathy for the girl. Tea houses and wine taverns hosted storytellers who told the legendary tale of this imperial scion living among the people, likening her to extraordinary gifts to those of an immortal descended to earth. She came from the masses, brought up by a family descended from generations of farmers, not unlike the current students in the Imperial College. She was righteous and benevolent, kind to her neighbors, and keenly able to relate to the hardships of the people. Even the students were carried away by this idealized vision. It was then that Xuexiujuo submitted his third and most crucial memorial. In it, he said the girl's elder brother had also been an aspiring scholar. He had previously entered Chudu during the reign of Xiande, but due to prejudice over his humble origins, his name had never made it onto the list of those who passed. After returning home, he wasted away from disappointment. So deep was the affection between the emperor's daughter and her elder brother that this became the source of unbearable distress in her heart. On the way to Chudu, she had asked Xuexiujuo many times about Secretariat Elder Hai's illness. When he spoke of how tirelessly Secretariat Elder Hai had worked tending to state affairs, the girl had shed bitter tears and lamented. "Were I a man, I would never have let the Secretariat Elder suffer such hardships." Xuexiujuo admitted that even he, a son of common birth from a noble clan, who had been subjected to his own share of harsh treatment on account of his birth, did not possess the same magnanimity of heart as the emperor's daughter. For this failing, he wrote, he felt deeply ashamed. In closing, Xuexiujuo said that there was no law in the world that decreed priority should be accorded to those of direct descent, nor those of noble blood in the selection of court officials, and that similarly, no ancestors had ever said only male children must be considered when it came to the selection of a prospective sovereign. Regardless, at this stage, the Zhou Empire was left with no other choice. The students were rapturous. They had finally found a suitable candidate. Prejudices over parentage and class were their greatest hurdles to fulfilling their own ambitions. They saw themselves as fellow sufferers, commiserating with the emperor's daughter over her hard lot in life. Li Tianheng had grown up in the lap of luxury. He had no understanding of the hardships of the people and had been repeatedly indicted by the Chief Surveillance Bureau for his pursuit of petty pleasures at the expense of worthwhile aspirations. How different he was from this emperor's daughter, bestowed upon their nation by the heavens. She seemed, in their imaginations, to be the most wonderful woman in the world. She had a heart that bled for the scholars of common origins. She was the goddess of mercy who had descended to the mortal realm to deliver the masses from suffering. And thus, amid a buzz of discussion that lasted an entire night and into the next morning, Xuexiu Zhuo, who had been lying low for so very long, emerged, at last, as the victor. Chapter 123. Yanqing. By the time Yu Xiaocai finished this tale, the tea on the table had gone cold. "I can't understand it," he said. "The students had been so harsh on the officials from common backgrounds. Why would they flock to Xuexiu Zhuo overnight? Don't tell me Xuexiu Zhuo, a son of the noble Xue clan, can do more for those from humble families than the commoner Minister Kong of the Tang Jiu Qing Commandery, who has always been diligent in administering state affairs. The Grand Secretary went to such great trouble to pave the way for us, yet it's still the noble clans who gained the upper hand in the end." Xiao Triye poured the cooled tea. "Xuexiu Zhuo may not necessarily give the nobles the upper hand," he commented. This time, he struck when his opponents were unprepared and caught both sides off guard. The Empress Dowager went around in circles with Han Cheng for so long because she had no candidate of her own. Clearly, Xuexiu Zhuo didn't leak any word of this girl to the old noble families aligned with the Empress Dowager. He also allowed his pawn, Han Cheng, to put himself in a vulnerable position when the late emperor passed away. Xuexiu Zhuo has already offended the noble clans. He understands this better than anyone. Yu Xiaocai looked back at him with a worried frown. "I thought about it all the way here, but I still can't figure out what he means to do. The new emperor will ascend the throne on a shaky foundation, and she's a woman to boot. Perhaps he did it merely for a moment of glory, but even if the Xue clan becomes more powerful, how long can Xuexiu Zhuo hold out under pressure from the Empress Dowager and the rest?" Shen Zichuan was thinking quickly. "We can't overlook a single clue if we want to understand this man's motives. At the Nanling hunting grounds, when Hua Siqian was pressured to revolt against the Xiande emperor, it was Secretariat Elder Hai and Xuexiu Zhuo who orchestrated the whole affair. At the time, Xuexiu Zhuo had audited the Ministry of Revenue's accounts in his role as Chief Supervising Secretary of the Office of Scrutiny for Revenue. You say Secretariat Elder Hai mentioned Hua Siqian's malfeasance again just before he died. My guess is that Xuexiu Zhuo was aware of the inside story of the fall of Zhongbo, and this was what allowed him to later join forces with Jiang Qingshan, the Provincial Administration Commissioner of Juexi, to investigate and take down Hua Siqian. This man is not cut from the same cloth as the likes of Wei Huaigu. He has been striking at the noble clans from the very beginning. When Xi Hongxuan talked about him, he said Xuexiu Zhuo was always busy with matters of state," Shen Zichuan continued. "After I took office as the Northern Judge in the Embroidered Uniform Guard, I looked through all the records of cases where the Embroidered Uniform Guard and the Court of Judicial Review investigated in concert. Xuexiu Zhuo did in fact handle many cases after his transfer from the Office of Scrutiny for Revenue to the Court of Judicial Review. Secretariat Elder Hai was an upright person who would never play favorites. His repeated promotion of Xuexiu Zhuo was on Xuexiu Zhuo's own merits. Even Lord Sun mentioned Xuexiu Zhuo's abilities to me on numerous occasions. Everyone seems to agree that his political achievements are outstanding, even among other up-and-coming talents." Now enlightened, Yu Xiaocai said, "To tell you the truth, Vice Commander, this is just what I can't figure out. All along, Xuexiu Zhuo has had a good reputation. Even the imperial censors from the Chief Surveillance Bureau have hardly any objections to him. The Chief Surveillance Bureau's reviews of him are excellent, or he couldn't have been promoted. But that's why I don't understand the rationale behind his current actions. He's not like Panzhu Gui and his ilk, who seized power merely to put money in their own pockets." Xiao Chuye leaned back and draped his arms over the armrests of his chair. He said to Shan Zichuan, "That's right. We also discussed Xuexiu Zhuo when we were in Chudu. Yao Wenyu said that although Secretariat Elder Hai never accepted him as his pupil, he still held Xuexiu Zhuo in high regard. The Secretariat Elder even asked him to hold the crown during Yao Wenyu's coming-of-age ceremony. In the first few years after he took office, the policy essays he wrote focused on doing away with the prejudiced views of the noble clans in hopes that the Imperial College, led by Hua Siqian, might be restored to the glory it enjoyed in Grand Preceptor Yao's day. With the exception of Liangyi, the Grand Secretariat at the time, as well as the 6 ministries beneath it, were almost entirely composed of officials from noble clans. For a long time, officials in Chudu were appointed solely based on their family name. Even the illiterate 13th son of the Hua clan could take up a post in the Ministry of War and interfere with the Imperial Army's affairs. Meanwhile, Kongqiu was toiling away in the lower ranks of the Ministry of Justice, while Liang Cuishan, whom you yourself recommended for advancement, was repeatedly demoted within the Ministry of Revenue with no hope of promotion. Shan Zichuan nodded slowly. The fact that Xuexiu Zhuo held the post of Chief Supervising Secretary of the Office of Scrutiny for Revenue at the time was an indication of Hua Siqian's desire to get him out of the way. The Chief Supervising Secretary was theoretically an important post that gave Xuexiu Zhuo direct access to the Emperor. But at the time, the Xiande Emperor was not in control of his own court. Hua Siqian, as the leader of the Grand Secretariat, had the final say over what Xuexiu Zhuo could accomplish in that position. It's during this period that we begin to see a change in Xuexiu Zhuo's approach. He stepped back from his radical rhetoric and kept a low profile, thus becoming the person we're all familiar with now. The longer Yu Xiaozai listened, the more alarmed he became. But if he shares the same goals as the scholar officials, why didn't he reach out to us? Then, was Han Cheng? He put everything into toppling Hua Siqian and Pan Zhugui in the incident leading up to Li Jianheng's ascension, Shan Zichuan explained. But he very quickly realized that Li Jianheng was not bold, decisive, or visionary enough for him. Li Jianheng was constantly caught in the tug of war between various interests, and the scholar officials of common origins, even under Secretariat Elder Hai's leadership, failed to remove the influence of the Empress Dowager. Shan Zichuan turned his head aside. The little jade bead on his right ear was eclipsed by shadow. A great part of the Imperial College students' dissatisfaction with the scholar officials was their weakness in standing up to the noble clans. This is likely also the reason Xuexiu Zhuo no longer trusts these officials of common origins. Secretariat Elder Hai's conservative approach kept Great Zhou from falling apart at the seams, yet it also gave the noble clans a chance to catch their breath. The noble clans feed on one another. You saw how Wei Huaigu's fall made way for Han Cheng's rise. This was not the result Xuexiu Zhuo wished for. Shan Zichuan stopped and narrowed his eyes. No wonder he wanted Xiansheng so badly. Qi Huilian had long been a guiding light for the radicals, those in favor of complete political turnover. He had achieved great things in the Eastern Palace. In the short time before the Crown Prince's untimely demise, Qi Huilian accomplished such feats as establishing the Yellow Register, a victory he likely owed in part to the diligence of the Eastern Palace's subordinates in discharging their duties, and their tenacity in forging ahead regardless of public opinion. If Xuexiu Zhuo wanted to break away from the conciliatory approach that characterized Liangyi's era, that he would seek Qi Huilian's help seemed of a piece. Yet Qi Huilian had refused, and Xuexiu Zhuo had handed him over to Han Cheng. Shan Zichuan pressed his lips into a thin line. In the candlelight, his profile was cold and detached. He'll stop at nothing to achieve his goals. This man puts faith in no one but himself. He is counting on the new emperor to prop up the Zhou Empire. For this, he doesn't hesitate to offend the conservative noble clans. He wishes to bring new blood into Chudu and overhaul the system. We helped take down Wei Huaigu and others in Chudu, yet their fall has merely opened vacancies into which he can install his own people. Lord Yu, you were wrong. His memorial moved the hearts of the Empire's students not because the Emperor's daughter sounded wonderful, but because his last sentence did. There is no law in the world that decreed priority should be accorded to those of direct descent, nor those of noble blood in the selection of court officials. The noble clans dominated the upper echelons of government and kept a stranglehold on the imperial court of Great Zhou. The reigning emperor's assertiveness, or the lack thereof, dictated whether those from common backgrounds were able to break through the blockade of those 8 family names. The common officials had been at a nadir since the latter years of the Yanqing era. It had been too long since they'd tasted any true victories. What they desperately needed was a sovereign well disposed toward scholars of common backgrounds. Male or female, it mattered not, as long as this candidate was able to rouse the hearts of the humble scholars, inspire their confidence, and shoulder the weight of their expectations after the successive passing of Qi Huilian and Liangyi. They would be embraced by the students of the Imperial College. The Empress Dowager's long reign had not only intensified the ostracism they faced, it had amplified the weakness and incompetence of the Li clan's emperors, an impression that had taken firm root in the minds of the masses. The students had been so harsh on Kong Qiu and Sun Yu because they could no longer endure the repeated compromises the officials made in the current imperial court. Liangyi, who had conceded his entire career, had given his life in one final remonstration. Why must Kong Qiu go on conceding? The chance to reform the world was within their grasp. Failing to act now was tantamount to a dereliction of duty. But was this really the moment? Shan Zichuan thought otherwise. Why had Liangyi chosen to make concession after concession to the noble clans? Because these clans had long become a chronic disease infecting Great Zhou. They ought to have scraped the bones and cauterized the wounds as early as during the Yanqing years. Yet they dragged their feet, and Zhongbo fell before Liangyi could make his move. The empire had resembled a feeble man in his twilight years, set upon and kicked by thieves until he choked on blood. It was hard for cuts and bruises to heal, and even harder for internal injuries to mend themselves. In the moments before his death, Liangyi had questioned the imperial court. He had asked if this was everyone's fault for allowing this degeneracy. Had he included himself too? If he hadn't pushed Hua Shiqian so hard back then, if he had been more diplomatic in his handling of things, would Zhongbo have avoided the tragedy of the Biansha massacre? Liangyi would never know, but this incident directly affected the way he led the administration in the later years of the Xiande Emperor's reign. He adopted an attitude of appeasement, attempting a softer influence. He never dared act so rashly again. He moved with a constant awareness of the risks of the political situation he was mired in. But these were considerations the fledgling students could not understand. Perhaps Xuexiu Zhuo did not have the power to dictate the direction in which the empire's students would move. He was a fisherman balancing amid the stormy waves, trying to discern the optimal moment to cast his net. This man hadn't crawled through the mud of the imperial court for so many years just to return empty-handed. He understood the resentment between the common scholars and the court officials better than Shan Zichuan. The flames of war had been ignited by others before his time, and the sparks now flying had kindled the same fire in those who followed in their steps. Xuexiu Zhuo had repeatedly beseeched Liangyi to formally accept him as a student, to no avail. He later took desperate measures to force Qi Huilian to help him, yet he still failed. He was a stubborn rock amid a battle between two parties, destined to cut his own bloody path out. He was a merciless character who would not spare even himself. A fierce light gleamed in Shan Zichuan's eyes. He felt that he had been thwarted. He had been driven out of Chudu like a dog with its tail between its legs, defenseless and beaten half to death. Xuexiu Zhuo had tossed Shi Hongxuan aside at exactly the right time, then emptied the Shi clan's silver vaults before Shan Zichuan could make his move. He had long been preparing for this day. And what had Shan Zichuan been doing at that time? He had still been naively thinking he could rely on his silver tongue to drive a wedge between the noble clans. On reflection, Xue Xiuzhuo had revealed his might as early as the scandal regarding the imperial army's misrecorded silk. Shen Zichuan had been defeated in this battle, but since he was still alive, he could fight this war to the end. As the one who had inherited Qi Huilian's life's work, he couldn't accept being defeated again and again. They had already fled from the sheltered walls of Chudu to the crumbling frontier torn by war. He had to find his footing fast, or there would be no place left for him in these turbulent times. There was no weakling among the up-and-coming talents of the land. All watched the developing situation ravenously, like a tiger eyeing its prey. If he wished to sit down and calmly debate ideals, he first had to win the right to a seat at the table. Xiao Chuye looked at Shen Zichuan's side profile and asked Yu Xiaozai, "Have you seen the girl emperor?" Yu Xiaozai was in the middle of fishing the letter Cun Yu had written out of his robes. His hands stilled. Not yet. When I left Chudu, the Ministry of Rites was starting their preparations for the coronation. The Empress Dowager wanted to summon the Emperor's daughter for a meeting, but Xue Xiuzhuo declined. Xiao Chuye tapped the armrest gently. Sounds like he isn't completely confident of success either. We'll have to wait and see. It may be that this girl emperor he raised in 4 short years is no more than a paper tiger that will topple at the first touch. I'd like to see how long he thinks she can bluff Chudu. Shen Zichuan shook off his abstraction and composed himself. Let's just hope she isn't another Li Jianheng. Restless, Xiao Chuye straightened and asked Yu Xiaozai. We still don't know what her official name will be. If they're going to write her into the imperial family tree, will she go down as Li Jianting? A strange expression came over Yu Xiaozai's face. That's the name, all right. He wrote on the mat with his finger, one stroke at a time. But the Jian character is not the same generational character shared with the late emperor, nor the Ting of her commoner name. It's written like this. Stroke by stroke, 2 characters emerged. Sword and thunder. Shocked, Shen Zichuan exchanged glances with Xiao Chuye. Alrighty, well, that was a lot. So let's talk about it, shall we? Yes, let me get my thoughts together. The heir was a girl. Okay? Putting that out there. The heir is a girl. She was born from incest. This is the Guangcheng Emperor and his daughter-in-law from, I think, Prince Teen's wife. Okay, lovely, but not really. She was birthed under the name Liangyi. Okay? So we move forward, and we have it where Liangyi found someone from the Yan clan in Huaizhou. You know, because after we find out the person getting on the throne is a girl, who she is, then we go back a little bit, right, as Yu Xiaozai talks. So he finds someone from the Yan clan in Huaizhou, but the guy is in his 70s or about to be 70. And of course, it's like, will he even make it? You know, which we know he doesn't. So people are not excited. The Empress Dowager is like, no, this man's about to die. This man is about to die. We don't want him. So Han Cheng, of course, is trying to separate himself from the noble clans because, you know, he wants his person, his family member, to be lifted onto the throne. The Empress Dowager, we have also, no longer wants to rely on an heir, but on herself. So she even clearly started to put pressure onto Liangyi by having someone visit him like every day, you know. So it's a lot of tension going on in the opening chapter because everybody's trying to stake their claim now, or everybody's trying to fill this seat. And so we have that Liangyi's influence is the Empress Dowager's greatest threat, right? This man, honestly, holds more power than the emperor. has ever held, you know? Like, just going back really quickly to page 117, it says, although he had for decades asserted that he was beholden to no faction or clique, he had long become the beacon to which all the scholars of common households in the land looked for guidance. He had, without meaning to, become a powerful force all on his own. So then, of course, even though he is a threat, we also have Han Chung that is a problem in his own right to the Empress Dowager. And so when all this arguing back and forth is happening in the court, she's letting it happen because she wants the nobles to get rid of Han Chung without her having to lift a finger, right? And then apparently I have a note on page 124, while she's talking about everything and expressing her grievances and, they're trying to figure everything out. At one point she says, our forefathers laid down the rule that the harem is not to interfere with politics. I've overstepped my station so many times. It shames me to face my ancestors. And then she says, Jian Hung passed away so suddenly from illness. I'm sorry, ma'am, what? He passed away from, From illness? Oh, okay. We call a sword, we call a knife to his body and the blood everywhere. We call that an illness? Did I miss something? Do I need to go back and reread volume 3? Read those chapters again? I would really rather not. Because when did he die from illness? Maybe I'm too tired. Maybe I've been exhausting myself and I missed that fact. Because what are we saying? What illness? Anyway, so we just have this whole time, right? The Empress Dowager against Han Chung, against Hai Liangyi, against the Empress Dowager, against Han Chung, against Hai Liangyi. This battle of 3, right? And Hai Liangyi, he's going in on the nobles, right? At some point, finally, he has had enough. So he starts going in, giving his grand speech about everything before he sacrifices himself. Y'all, I was not ready for that. I had already said in the previous book that I anticipated that he was going to be dying because it just felt like it. Because it kept talking about him being old and tired and stuff. And then it got to the point where it was like, he's sick. And I was like, y'all, are y'all prepping me to have him killed off? But it was hard. It was hard for me. And the crazy thing is, like, I didn't even though I expected it, I just still was not ready for it. I really wasn't. And even the Empress everybody, nobody was ready for it. We've all been like, woo, boom, boom, da boom. So, but I do love the fact that even in his speech at the end, his fury with everyone, he does say that, I am to blame for the decline of the state. I have been remonstrating with the ruler all my life. Whether I'm successful or not, I have no more fear. I appreciate, even if we didn't get everything, that he was like, okay, for the decline, I have some responsibility in this. Okay. But I don't want to talk anymore about that. Okay. He died. He murked himself. And then that put Han Chung in a difficult spot, obviously, because his candidate was no longer in the running. And so we move on to the next chapter, and we just have it that, of course, they were like, okay, fine. Let's bring since Han Chung refuses to provide proof of this person's background, and then even when he did, it was not approved. They were like, okay, let's bring this old heir that Hai Liangyi was talking about. But he died before he could get to Chudu. So that is what it is. And then we have Han Chung talking about he wants to create a chamber of deliberation of state affairs, which would be filled by the noble clans. And honestly, they do need a chamber of deliberation of state affairs because they don't know what to do. Everybody's running around like chickens with their heads cut off at this moment. But it is a problem that he wants to fill it with all nobles, and he wants to keep his military power. So, of course, with him wanting to keep his military power, it was like, well, no, we're not going to approve this then. Kong Chiu was like, no, sir. But then, they're trying to make concessions and everything like that. And The students of the Imperial College were already enraged by having lost two prominent figures, Qi Huilian and Hai Liangyi. And so they're stepping up and they're even calling out their own. Like, you guys are weak. You're the common officials. You're supposed to have followed partially in Hai Liangyi's footsteps, but also see even the complacency that Hai Liangyi had. And this is like your moment to seize control, to make a difference, not still bow to the nobles. And so I will say, though, they was getting out of control, which I would prefer to keep my platform out of like any real world scenarios, because this is not the place for that. But just speaking in generics, okay, when it does come to riots and stuff like that, like, people will get a cause sometimes and it's a righteous cause and they have like the right to be furious and upset, but then even in the midst of that, you'll see people who are making decisions that are not good. Like, I'm not trying to be funny, but slinging a sword at Kongqiu, absolutely not. Trying to destroy or set fire to someone's home, absolutely not. Like, I get it. These scholars, they're upset. And they're like, you guys are traitors, or you're, to the common folk, you're being complicit, yada, yada, yada. But it's like, hold up, like, calm down. Let's try different approaches. Like, this isn't going to help anything by y'all doing that. It's just going to make everyone more stressed, more enraged, more tired, and more likely to stumble and make bad choices, so, but good on them still for stepping up and everything and all of that stuff. So, yeah, they're out of control, but at the same time, they're doing it up. They're doing the doggone thing. So I can't be mad at them too much. So we have Xue Xiujuo, who waited for this. He waited for all of this calamity, which was not exactly what Hai Liangyi was hoping for, when he gave up the ghost, as some people say. But there's chaos. And Xue Xiujuo decides to take advantage of that. And he submits his memorial with the evidence of relation to the Guangcheng emperor for Li Ping Ting to Ping Ching, whatever. I don't remember. Whatever her name was, for this girl. And that's not enough, though, of course. So then he sets out another memorial giving the information on her background. And oh my God, does it spread like wildfire and make all the common folk, make the Imperial College students go crazy over her. Because, oh my gosh, we have a savior. Like, she understands the common people, unlike our previous emperor, unlike our previous emperors, period. Like, she's so kind. Everyone's vouching for her. She's got auspicious signs. She's the savior, blah, blah, snore. And everyone is just like, yes, eating it up, looking at her like she's some saving grace. And then boom, he puts his third memorial about her elder brother who had wanted to be, who took the imperial exam or whatever, and he was rejected due to prejudice. Icing on the cake, right? Just keep piling it on really thick, because now we're getting even more enraged and impassioned. What? Prejudice just because he comes from a humble background? What? He wasted away from disappointment and this grieved the little girl? Oh, how awful. And this is what, pushed her forward to really want to study and blah, blah, blah. Oh man, we need a savior. And she's so magnanimous and blah, blah, snore. He played that out very well, because at the end of the day, even when we have people who, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. When we have people stepping up for a cause, right? And they want to make change, and they have just reasons for wanting to make change, there are still weaknesses even in these types of scenarios where, man, I really don't know how to word what I'm trying to say, but I got to figure it out. Basically, they're looking to someone to be their savior, to really truly make the change that they're aspiring to make. But I'm not sure they should be so excited. I don't know. I mean, if there's one thing that I have learned just in general, is that no emperor, no president who steps into office is going to be a saving grace. They all promise us wonderful things. They all promise us good deeds that they're going to do, right? Where are those promises? You know? And so I'm just like, I don't know. Should we be this excited? Also, I don't know. I'm gonna just leave it alone. I'm gonna leave it alone and go to the next thing. So the last chapter that we're gonna talk about is Yanqing. Anyway, so in this chapter, we see that, okay, Xiaojia has actually been fighting the noble clans from the very beginning, because Xiaojia was like, oh my gosh, she's going to give the nobles the upper hand, and Xiaoqia and Shang Zuchuan is like, not necessarily. Clearly, this man has been fighting them since the beginning. Possibly he knew about what happened, the scheming behind Zhongbo and everything, and he has been fighting them, but at some point he had to change his tune. He had to play smart and change up his game. And that reminds me of, when Xiao Chuya and Shang Zuchuan were talking, and remember Shang Zuchuan was like, he's being contradictory. When you looked at all his essays, he was talking about this and that for the common people and da 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 da. And now he's contradictory. And remember in my notes, I was like, okay, is he truly contradictory though? Like, has he changed his views now that he's up there and he's made it big, or is he just pretending? I remember asking that. I was like, is he changing because he had to? Is it a facade, a disguise? And so, yeah, that's exactly what it was. He was biding his time to bada boom, ba boom, with all of this stuff. So then we have the common officials are not trusted, again, yes, by the Imperial College students, but also by Xiaojia. He doesn't trust them. And Li Jianheng was not good enough for him. It's so funny to say that. But, he had done the thing with Liangyi and took down Hua Siqian and all of that stuff, brought up Li Jianheng, and things did not go the way that he thought they would go. They did not go the way he wanted them to go, because Li Jianheng was that was not the position for him. Okay. I mean, he was starting to study and learn and everything, but he just was not raised for that position. Right. And so it was like, okay, well, he's not good enough for me. Someone else is going to have to take that place, which he had already been building this up. But, for the just in case. So it's just like, okay, well, yeah, sure, whatever. And so then we call to question this whole issue of Liangyi having been complicit. Liangyi having elevated common people in positions, right? This is awesome. Liangyi having fought against the noble clans on multiple occasions for things, but still taking a step back and allowing certain things to happen. Which again, in his final speech, he said, I take some responsibility for the fall of Great Zhou. And so it's like, I'm not mad at Liangyi, because he was doing what I believe he was doing his best, and he was making change, even if it wasn't necessarily all the change that everyone wanted to see. It wasn't as good as it could be. He was paving the way for those after him. Could he have done better? Probably. But had it not been for Liangyi, would we have all these others who are going to rise? Because I know they're going to rise, So I have mad respect for Liangyi, despite any concessions he may have made, despite him not pushing too hard. He's still the GOAT, So then we move on, and of course, because of a certain action concerning the Empress Dowager and Xueshu Zhuo not wanting her to have her hands on the girl or whatever just yet, it's possible that he's not 100% confident in her, in Li Jianting now. So we'll see how that goes. And of course, we have Shun Zitran, who's like just reviewing everything and realizing that he definitely was defeated in this battle of wits when it comes to Xueshu Zhuo, but there's still a war that he can win, you know? So, and then of course the girl's name is changed. Not the Jian of the generational character, not the Ting of her commoner name, but it's been changed to the two characters Jian and Ting for sword and thunder. Now I know how to say sword, which is Jian, fourth tone, Jian. I don't know how to say thunder. I was trying to find it. I didn't look too hard, I'm gonna be completely honest. But the way that I saw how to say thunder kept showing up differently than what's in here. So I'm assuming this is an old way to say thunder, or it's potentially a more poetic way to say thunder. Like, kind of like with moon, it's yue, liang. But the poetic way to say it is Chenjuan, which is where the Chen in Mari Chan comes from. But anyway, I don't know. I feel like these notes this time are all over the place. Hopefully y'all just ignored them. That's it for today. Have a beautiful one. If you are on Patreon, I will see y'all again for the next few chapters on Thursday. If you are on YouTube, then I will see y'all again on Saturday for the next chapters. Yes, that is correct. Anyway, please let me know y'all thoughts and reactions to these chapters. I hope you all enjoyed them, and let's continue on with this story because I need to know what's about to happen next. So have a good day and or night, and well, Einiman.